For 22 years he drove past it every day. A billboard on the side of the road, a girl's face, a $75,000 reward, a question nobody answered. His name was Chris Lambert, a shy singer-songwriter who called himself a random boy with a beard. He had never investigated anything in his life. One day in 2018, he stopped driving past the billboard and started asking questions. 3 years later, when the sheriff of San Luis Obispo County stood at a podium and announced arrests in a case that had been cold for 25 years, he credited Chris Lambert. This is what it looks like when the detective never stood out to be one. Memorial Day weekend, 1996. Kristin Smart is 19 years old, a freshman at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo. She is bright, athletic, funny, and she wants to be an architect. That Saturday night, she goes to an off-campus party. She drinks more than she should, and in the early hours of Sunday morning, 2 students walk her back towards the dorms. Somewhere along the way, a third person joins them, a fellow freshman named Paul Flores. The 2 original students peel off when they reach their own dorm. Paul Flores walks Christine the rest of the way. She is never seen again. 2 days later, Christine's mother Denise gets a call from a Cal Poly's campus police. Her daughter hasn't been seen since the weekend. Paul Flores is the last person to have seen her. He gives a statement to the police. He says he walks her to her dorm. He says she went inside. He has bruise under his eye that he cannot explain to investigators' satisfaction. Police name him a person of interest, and then for the next 25 years, he is never charged. The investigation stumbled from the start. Campus police initially handled the case and lost critical early hours before county sheriff's deputies took over. No crime scene had been preserved, no dorm room had been properly secured. Christine's body was never found. Without a body, charging Paul Flores with murder was considered nearly impossible. Her family put up billboards across the Central Coast, $75,000 reward, her smiling face, and a phone number. The leads dried up, the case went cold, and Paul Flores went on with his life. He moved to Southern California, got jobs, lived in an apartment in San Pedro. For 25 years, he was the only suspect anyone had ever seriously considered. And for 25 years, he walked free, but someone kept driving past that billboard every day for 22 years. And in 2018, he decided he couldn't drive past it anymore. Chris Lambert was 8 years old when Kristin Smart vanished. He grew up in Orcutt, a small town about 140 miles up the coast from Los Angeles. He remembers it frightening him as a child. Someone had gone missing and nobody knew what happened. 22 years later, he is 30 years old, a singer-songwriter and recording engineer, shy, reserved, by his own description, a random boy with a beard. He has recording equipment, he has a phone, and he has time. He decides to make a podcast. Not because he thinks he will solve anything. I thought I would give it a shot, he said, and see if I could get a few people talking. He makes his first call, then a second, then a third. He tracks down an Australian exchange student who had been at Cal Poly in 1996, someone investigators had interviewed in the early years of the probe and then apparently dismissed. That student told Lambert he had seen Paul Flores and Kristin Smart struggling near where she was last seen. Lambert noted it and kept going. In September 2019, Lambert releases episode 1 of Your Own Backyard. Within weeks, millions of people are listening. Over the following months, Lambert does what professional investigators had not managed to do in 22 years. He gets people talking. A former colleague of Paul Flores' mother, Susan, contacts Lambert after hearing the podcast. She tells him Susan came into work after Memorial Day weekend 1996, saying she hadn't slept because her husband had received a phone call in the middle of the night and left in his car. The implication was clear. Paul had called his father and his father had come. Then another listener contacts Lambert, a tenant who had lived for a year in Susan Flores' home in Arroyo Grande, the home of Paul's father Ruben. She told Lambert that every morning at 4:20 a.m. she heard a watch alarm going off somewhere in the house. Kristin Smart had worked as a lifeguard at the Cal Poly pool. Her shift started at 5 a.m. She would have set her watch to wake her up at 4:20, a watch alarming every morning at 4:20, in the house of the man who was now suspect of helping bury the body. Lambert described it as the moment in the podcast series that most people have been just completely shaken. He did not publish that detail, he sent it directly to investigators. Then came the earring. A woman who had rented Susan Flores' home 4 months after Kristin disappeared contacted Lambert after hearing the podcast. She had been washing her car in the driveway when something shiny caught her eye. A single woman's earring, red with what looked like a dried smudge on the back. It appeared to match the jewelry Kristin was wearing on the billboard. Lambert connected the woman to investigators. In 2019, the sheriff's deputies confirmed they had interviewed several new witnesses whose information came directly through the podcast, and those witnesses, combined with new evidence they weren't yet ready to disclose, had produced physical evidence linked to Kristin's disappearance. April 13, 2021, Paul Flores, 44 years old, is arrested at his home in San Pedro, California, charged with murder. His father, Ruben Flores, 8 years old, arrested the same morning at his home in Arroyo Grande, charged as an accessory. Authorities believed Ruben had helped his son hide Kristin's body. Sheriff Ian Parkinson stood at a podium. He said what Chris did with the podcast was put it out nationally to bring in new information. It did produce some information that I believe was valuable. Chris Lambert was in the crowd. It's hard to take much credit, he said later, but I was one piece of the puzzle that helped to make this all come together when it did. Now, the detail I asked you to hold from the beginning. The Australian exchange student, the one Lambert tracked down early, the one investigators had dismissed years before, the one who said he saw Paul Flores and Kristin Smart struggling near where she was last seen, that interview became the cornerstone of Lambert's second episode. It was heard by 7.5 million people, and it brought forward witnesses who had never spoken to police. Witnesses who had information they didn't know was relevant until they heard someone else's account and recognized what they knew. The dismissed account became the thread became the podcast became the witnesses became the arrest. October 18th, 2022, a jury found Paul Flores guilty of the first-degree murder of Kristin Smart. March 2023, he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Ruben Flores was acquitted to the accessory charge. Kristin's body was never found. The billboard on the side of the road in Arroyo Grande still stands. Her family had said they plan to keep it there until her remains are found and she can come home. Chris Lambert takes no advertising on the podcast. He never has. He relies on donations. The podcast hit 7.5 million downloads the week of the arrests. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. He said it was driving him insane. But he stayed focused, patient, polite, because that is what this kind of work requires. Not a badge, not a lab, not 25 years of law enforcement experience. A billboard he couldn't stop thinking about, a phone, and the willingness to call strangers and ask really personal questions out of the blue. Sometimes the person who solves the case is just the one who refused to drive past the billboard one more time. Every case in this channel is solved by someone who refused to look away. Sometimes it's a detective with 24 years on the force, sometimes it's a professor in a laundromat, and sometimes it's a shy boy with a beard and a microphone. The next case is waiting for you.